Welcome to the Detroit Institute of Arts Thursdays at the Museum program. I'm Lawrence Marble, Director of the Auburn Hills Public Library, joining you today to celebrate our library's Inside Out installation. Now in its 11th year, the Inside Out program brings high-quality reproductions of the DIA's collection to outdoor venues throughout Metro Detroit to increase engagement between the museum and its diverse audience. During today's programming, we will be looking at images of ordinary people created by extraordinary artists, including Edgar Degas' Dancers in the Green Room, where a reproduction is now on view at the Auburn Hills Public Library. Across the street at the Auburn Hills Community Center, you will also find Ben Sean's Bookshop, Hebrew Books, Holy Day Books. We'd like to encourage you to come to see the works of art when you stop by to pick up your holds. And please remember, curbside pickup is still being offered. During today's program, we'd like to encourage you to please ask questions. You can do this by selecting the Q&A icon on the right side of your screen. Questions will be read on screen by Christine Mark, the DIA's Manager of Volunteer Development. This event is being recorded, so if you like to watch again later, you can find a link on the DIA's Facebook and YouTube page. Today, we welcome three highly trained DIA docents, Cynthia Patrick, Jim O'Malley, and Deb Coombs. Please give them a warm welcome.
Again, welcome to the latest edition of Thursdays at the Museum. As Lawrence said, the theme today is taken from the DIA's 2015 exhibition, Ordinary People by Extraordinary Artists. They were talented, they were well educated, but underappreciated and frustrated. The artists that we'll be looking at created new possibilities for expression and began the art phenomenon known as Impressionism. Today, we'll take a tour of 19th century France, strolling down Parisian boulevards, including backstage passes for the Paris Opera and the Moulin Rouge. I'm Cindy Patrick, DIA docent for 15 years, and I'll be joined today by Deb Coombs and Jim O'Malley. Deb and Jim, could you tell us a little bit about yourselves?
Hello there, I'm Deb Coombs, and thanks so much for inviting me into your home. I'm so proud to be a part of this team, and I've been a docent at the DIA for almost 10 years.
Hi everyone, my name is Jim O'Malley. I've been a docent at the Detroit Institute of Arts for 3 years and you have possibly have seen me in the past on Thursdays at the museum, and I'm looking forward to our presentation today. Cindy?
Now back to Deb for a look at the unconventional work of Edgar Degas.
Yes, let's talk about this very first piece, Edgar Degas, Extraordinary Artist. Here's a photo of him right here. Edgar Degas was born in Paris to a very wealthy family. His early training in art was at the very prestigious, but also very traditional art academy in Paris called École des Beaux-Arts. Although he had a first-class education, he was rarely interested in being a conventional artist. No, he wanted to work in a very new, exciting, contemporary way. Edgar Degas was perhaps the most well-rounded artist of his generation. Not only could he paint, he could sculpt, he could make prints, and he also loved the camera and loved to take photographs. He was closely associated with a group of artists, young artists called the Impressionists, but where they wanted to paint outdoors to explore the effects of light, Degas wanted to work indoors and study line, form, and the human figure. He wanted to capture not only how a person moved, but how he could capture that movement in a very quick moment in time. This work, called Dancers, was the first piece that inspired our exhibition in 2014. Degas is very famous for his portrayal of dancers, particularly ballerinas, as those performers who were from the entertainment field and they had a certain attitude toward movement. This is a gorgeous pastel drawing. Take a look at it. Look at the blue. Look at the yellow of their dresses. Do you know pastels were a very, very important tradition in art? They were used since the 16th century and they rivaled painting. But Jim and Cindy, take a look at this painting or this drawing. It's kind of different, isn't it? Look at these figures. There's 3 ballerinas and they're overlapping one another. So we can't see their faces. We can't identify them at all. And not only that, their arms are askew and their bodies are cut off by the frame. But as I said before, Degas' interest was in movement, capturing that movement in a moment of time. He wasn't interested in portraying them in a formal pose at all. The next image is the next 2 images are little drawings or pastels that Degas would make, and he would make them small, and he would usually want to incorporate them into a larger work. The drawing on the left is a pencil drawing, ballet dancer adjusting her costume. Cindy, Jim, take a look at those quick strokes that Degas uses, those incisive lines, and look at the little touch of white on her shoulder. Everything defines her body. Also, notice, go back please, thanks. Notice that he is adjusting all these little lines of her dress and her legs. Gives it an air of spontaneity, doesn't it? But the most important feature of that sketch is her face as she looks down at her dress to adjust it. Now take a look at the image on the right side. That's another wonderful pastel, and it's similar to the first one in that it is very unusual. They're not, again, they're not posed in a formal pose at all. Here we see 2 dancers, and now we can know the very, very heaviness of their bodies, the twist of their postures. It's showing us how hard it is to be a ballet dancer. But look, the image is off again. The bodies are not in proportion. The legs and the arms are too long, and the dancers are cut off. Again, Degas is anatomically unconcerned. Now this next piece is a piece that was just mentioned, and it's called Dancers in the Green Room. Take a look at this. It looks like a snapshot composition. The way that Degas chose to create an unusual perspective or angle has become one of his trademarks. This work is called Dancers in the Green Room. It's an oil on canvas. Degas loved to paint the leisure activities of Parisians, especially those at the ballet. Not only did he frequent the ballet, but he had access to the backstage. So he would go there, pull up a chair, take out his camera, draw sketches, take photos, go back to his studio later on, put those images together, and create a composition very similar to this. Like I said earlier, it's a snapshot photo. You don't see these people in the middle of the scene. They're not posed at all. They're doing all kinds of movements. Looks like they're either warming up to go on stage or coming off the stage and cooling down. What's particularly interesting though about this particular scene is the image on the left. Look at that. Jim, Cindy, who puts a bass viola on the floor? And even more important, what kind of a dancer would put her foot on that musical instrument to tie or untie her shoe? This type of work was completely unheard of at the time, but Degas wanted to give us, the viewer, a modern slice of life by showing us this scene with the eye of a photographer. Now, I would like to go back to the earlier information that you all had and remind you again This is a full-size reproduction at the Auburn Hills Library. So if you would like to see it, we encourage you to go down there. This is part of our DIA Inside Out program, and the Auburn Hills Library is located on Seaburn Drive. Now, for our next image. This is Degas love to explore. The female nude, particularly the bather, is one of the oldest themes in art. While this figure is usually posed and very idealized in traditional art, Degas did not want to pose her that way. He did not want to portray the female nude in that way. What he wanted to do was play with the composition, and he would add everyday objects to the image, like a couch or the side of the tub. Notice these two women. One is leaning over to dry her body. The other one is leaning over to brush her hair. Both are totally unaware that they are caught in a very awkward moment of intimacy. Leaving the bath on the left is a lithograph, a print from a lithograph. I'll explain what a lithograph is later on in this presentation. And take a look at the one on the right, seated nude woman brushing her hair. It's another wonderful pastel. Take a look at that bright turquoise color that highlights her body, and the red color of her hair, it makes it just pop. This subject of the nude woman was revisited by Degas over and over again from 1885 to 1908. He loved this theme, and particularly he loved the curve of the back. Christine, are there any questions?
We do have a comment that the viewer said they really enjoy that you put together a few different pieces from Degas to show them all at the same time.
He was an interesting man with a long legacy. Okay, now I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Jim.
Thank you, Deb. I appreciate the viewer's comment because I'm going to be talking about some pieces that you would not necessarily associate with Degas. Edgar Degas was one of the greatest draftsmen or drawers of all time. He successfully bridged the gap between the old master tradition and what we call today modern art. Degas is especially identified by his depiction of movement, as Deb had talked about. He tried and was able to capture movement in a moment in time. In addition to ballet dancers and bathing women, Degas painted horses and racing jockeys. Degas had a lifelong interest in horse racing. First known as the sport of kings, it had become by Degas' time a favorite entertainment for all classes of people. So let's look at this painting together. Cindy, what is going on in this picture? I think you're going to have to unmute yourself, Cindy.
Thank you. I'm looking at it and I see that the horizon line is a little bit higher on this image than we usually see on a landscape. Normally it's kind of toward the bottom. I see horses. I see what I think are jockeys on horses because they're dressed in costumes or uniforms that look sort of alike in the way they're made, even though they're all in different combinations of color. I also think maybe it's sort of like an advertisement for Degas because he's got a horse. He's showing us that he can draw a horse from the front, from the side, profile, from the rear. And then as I look up into the background, it looks like I can see maybe it's a town. And then further up, almost to the top of the image, I'm not sure if I'm seeing mountains or if that's maybe a stormy day or weather.
Thanks, Cindy. Let's start from way back and we'll move our way forward. There are mountains in the background. They don't look like mountains, but we instinctively know what they are. That is the true essence of Impressionism. Much like the dancers, Degas' prints paints jockeys as anonymous people at work. In this piece, we can't see their faces and their backs are turned to us. What we do see is the movement of the horses achieved by his minimal, fleeting brushstrokes. Degas, again, breaks from the tradition of the masters with this piece. The masters would have painted a jockey at the moment of victory or being honored after a hard-fought race. But here, Degas portrays the jockeys as they are quietly grazing their horses. At an ordinary moment, one which the spectators who came to see the horse race would have never seen. It is a moment of quiet tranquility. The painting is not interested in bringing attention to the jockeys, even though they are wearing their brightly colored silks. Here, Degas focuses on the movement of the horses while grazing and depicts the horses from various perspectives, all achieved through minimal, fleeting brushstrokes. Our next piece is called Russet Landscape. And what you can, Cindy, can you move to the next piece? Nope, back one. There you go. Thank you. What you are looking at is a monotype, which is a unique type of printmaking made by drawing or painting directly onto a flat surface, such as a metal plate. The artist then places a sheet of paper over the design on the plate and prints the image by passing it through a press or hand rubbing the back of the paper. It is sometimes possible to print an additional impression or even several depending upon a wide range of factors, such as the amount of pigment or ink that was applied. This is a very unusual monotype in that it is a monoprint. Degas made this as a single print, very unusual in printmaking. It's so unusual that our prior curator of prints and drawings, Nancy Sodka, considered Russet Landscape as the greatest print in the DIA collection. So let's take a look at this print. Degas made Russet Landscape one October day in 1890 on vacation at the chateau of fellow artist Pierre-Georges Jeannot. And he had a chateau in the village of Denay, which is approximately 20 miles north of Dijon in the central part of France. An avid traveler, Degas planned the trip with sculptor Albert Bartholomew to central France as a leisurely holiday that would include a little work in Jeannot's art studio, which was equipped for printmaking. He and Bartholomew decided to travel by horse-drawn carriage in order to enjoy the countryside. Bartholomew drove while Degas made mental notes and observations. The original title of this work was Russet Passage, not Russet Landscape. Russet is a reddish-brown color, and passage means a road or path and might refer to a particular field or plain that sparked Degas' imagination as he passed through the sparse undulating terrain around Dijon on this beautiful autumn day. In any case, the artist made the monotype without making any preliminary studies. He used both ends of a brush, wet and dry cloths, sponges, and his fingers to stroke, dab, and smear the areas of yellow, blue, green, and purple oil paint onto a copper plate so as to suggest the texture of the various grasses and vegetation that grew along the path that he had passed upon. The copper plate was then covered with a damp sheet of paper and passed through a printing press to yield this unique impression now in the museum's collection. After less than an hour's work, Russet Passage was hung to dry, its corners clipped with clothespins and on a line strung across the studio. Degas created approximately 30 landscape images using these uncomplicated means during the week he spent in Jeannot's studio. All aspects of Russet Passage defy convention. He first chose to make landscapes as a print rather than a painting. He then made the landscape bordering on the abstract and printed it in full color. Degas created a body of work not previously realized. Russet Passage and the other color landscapes marked a new level of achievement in printmaking and in Degas' personal work. It is also for Degas a key movement for his style as he begins to move away from Impressionism towards the new movement of Expressionism. Expressionism is different from Impressionism in that Impressionists paint the scenes as if they have been only glanced at for a moment. Expressionism is directly focused on a personal emotional response, the emotional response that Degas had as he was passing along the countryside and how the scenery affected him personally and within his heart and mind. It was a response, his response to the real world, using disproportionate sizes, odd angles, and painting in vivid, intense colors. Our next piece, or actually two pieces, are of two men, Manet and Bossard. They had no idea that anyone was watching them. These works are portraits of Degas' close friends and fellow artists. Looking at the print on the left, we see the famous and immensely versatile artist Edward Manet, who Cindy Patrick will be discussing today, seated sideways in a chair, lost in thought. Notice the bold, swiftly drawn lines he used in depicting Manet. This is an exceptional print. The impression is one of the plate, and it's one of the second and perhaps the most interesting of states, or four states that he used. A state simply means that Degas at each state was working on the plate. He wasn't satisfied with it. He kept tweaking it. This is the second plate. Here he adds the top hat in the bottom left corner, an important element. In later versions or states, he reinforces the contours and draws them and makes them blacker and darker in many areas. In comparison, we have a watercolor over on our right of Bossard, the photographer. This is a gouache painting, which is an opaque watercolor painting. Bossard seems to have turned his back on us. Yet how expressive Degas depicts his gentle, unassuming personality, which we read in his mild, quizzical look and slightly stooped back. Just by showing Bossard from his back, we're able to determine his temperament, approximate age, and by his long tails, his social condition. Christine, any questions?
Yes, there are actually a couple. One was a comment that the audience member is very excited to see that Degas has more work out there than just ballerinas. So thank you for sharing that, Jim. And then also there was a question in regard to sculptures, and what kind of sculptures did Degas make?
He made various types of sculptures. His most famous sculptures were of young ballerinas, often used in different types of medium. Probably his most famous sculpture was done in wax. And what was unusual for the time was he made the sculpture of this young ballerina of the age of 13 or 14, and he made it of wax, and he then put an actual tutu on the girl. It was radical for the time. And so he dabbled in all the different mediums of art, whether it be printmaking, oil painting, sculpture. He was a well-rounded and very highly respected artist of the time.
Thank you, Jim. And then also, one of the viewers said they read that Degas had some vision loss in his older age.
Yes, that is correct. In his older age, he did begin to experience some vision loss. How much it impacted his art, I'm not certain of. But yes, that's a true statement. He really, and it worried him terribly that he was losing his sight.
Thank you.
And our next speaker is Cindy, who's going to be speaking about Manet. Cindy?
Hi, everyone. As Jim was talking about the print by Degas of Manet, I was thinking about how much more complimentary of an image it was of him. But I wanted you to notice, I'll go back one. Check his hairline right here. He's got that little part that comes out, and that is definitely true in this photograph. You can tell it's the same man, but I think the first one's a little more complimentary. Anyway, Manet, he was the leader, the innovator, a rebel, and probably the most unconventional, really, of all of the Impressionists that we're talking about today. And just to give you an example in his private life of how unconventionally he lived his life, he actually married his piano tutor, who was at the time that his tutor was his father's mistress. So kind of unusual that a young man would end up marrying his father's mistress, but that was Manet and that was how he operated. As I said, he was a rebel, and his career started at the very beginning with a tussle with the art establishment. He rejected the usual neoclassical imagery, which Deb was talking about earlier, where we had idealized portraits of people. He wasn't interested in idealizing anyone. He had a disdain of social privilege. He had a disdain of imperialist authority, and his own sketchy, casual style really bothered the art world of the time. We talked about Degas and also Renoir. They both looked up to him as a leader and soon followed his improvisational and spontaneous methods. His desire really throughout his career was to reach a broad audience, and his own artistic curiosity led him to printmaking and other mediums of being able to reproduce things in multiples so he could get to a broad audience. So the two that we're looking at right now, one is an etching and the other is a lithograph. The one on the left is the etching and the one on the right is the lithograph. They're of a fellow artist by the name of Berthe Morisot. She actually was his sister-in-law, and he frequently used her as a model, I'm sure because she was accessible, to him. It's said that she met his brother Eugene while they were both copying paintings at the Louvre. Which is what artists did then, and they still do today. If you walk the halls of the DIA, you can often see students from College for Creative Studies or Wayne State in the halls sketching. So Jim and Deb, let's compare these two versions. Notice the differing thickness of the lines from the one on the left to the one on the right. And notice the intensity of her eyes. They're kind of piercing. They're not looking directly at us. They're offset a little bit to what would be my left. So, she's looking at something outside of the image that's in front of us. Although the two prints give us the illusion of being very sketchy and made in a very spontaneous way, I want you to know that that was not the case at all. The impression or the spontaneity of these was very well calculated. The final outcome wasn't meant to look like a formal portrait, but to be an impression of Morisot. However, both of these techniques, etching and lithography, required many, many steps and were a very complex method of creating an image. So it wasn't spontaneous at all when it was being made. Moving on to At the Prado. These two prints are examples of the same image, and they're just in different stages of development. So the one on the right would have been inked lightly and then would have been printed. The one on the left would have been inked in a heavier manner, some of it wiped away, and then printed. So this is an example of where the artist is manipulating the actual technique. He chose etching to illustrate the fashionably dressed visitors at the Prado Museum in Spain. And he, again, purposely chose etching as the medium so they could produce many multiples of the same image. These prints were affordable. They could reach a wide audience and were intended for everyone's enjoyment. He didn't want his work to just become the property of the privileged rich or to just hang on museum walls. Moving on to our next print. And Deb, I'm going to call out to you and ask you, what's happening here?
Wow. Wow. This guy has got some colorful clothes on. I don't really know who he is. He's got a very mischievous look on his face. He might be a little older. He's got that white beard. Look at the socks. They don't even match. One's green, one's red. But Cindy, what's that behind his back that he's carrying?
Deb, this is Polish Chanel. And in some of our previous editions of Thursdays at the Museum, you may know that I love to say these odd words, and Polish Chanel is one. So this is a print that was a forerunner of color lithography. And Manet, being the innovator that he was exploring color lithography at least 20 years before any other artist. Polish Chanel is from the French translation of the Italian name Pulcinello. And Pulcinello was a character from the Commedia dell'arte, which in English is comedy of craft. It was a form of theater started in Italy all the way back in the 1500s. So you were mentioning that he had on two different colored socks. You were taking a look at, that his face looks like he's an older man, really colorful outfit, and you were wondering a little bit about what's behind his back. Well, the things that we see here are attributes of Polish Chanel, or as we know him in the United States, Punch and Judy. So you can see he's got the hook nose, that's one of his attributes. And then he has this baton, which he actually used, unfortunately, to strike. So, when we see puppet theater, Punch and Judy uses that baton for striking Judy. Bad Punch, bad boy. Moving on to these two prints side by side are an example of Manet using his art almost as journalistic media would use a photograph today. These were kind of what we would call protest pieces, and they center around the 1870-71 siege of Paris, and this was during the Franco-Prussian War. Unlike many of the other artists that we've been looking at or other impressionists, Manet was totally unafraid to focus on the impact of political events and how and what they did in terms of the common man. He didn't choose to glorify war scenes as monumental landscapes that were popular at the time. You think of someone like Delacroix, who would paint these gigantic paintings of battle scenes. That wasn't what Manet was looking for. He really wasn't putting any of his own judgment in here. He was just trying to capture a moment, and he wanted to get it out to the public. So his imagery was of barricaded avenues, death resulting from street fights, long lines to buy meat. These were things that were affecting the common man. And these prints were created so that they could be widely distributed. The former print illustrated the effects of war on common citizens, civil war. And the one that is titled The Execution of Maximilian was truly conceived as a protest piece. And this was to illustrate the French government's action in Mexico at this time period. Maximilian had been installed by Napoleon III as the Emperor of Mexico. And it led to his death by the Mexican people because they wanted to regain control of their own country. The power of protest in this image and the power of the print was in its wide accessibility. As you can imagine, this protest piece was definitely not welcomed by the French government. Christine, do we have any questions?
Cindy, actually, the question was in regard to Police Chanel and the idea of making color prints. And how common was that?
Well, at this point in time, it was very uncommon. He was really the innovator. And in order to make a color etching or a color lithograph, this print would have to be run through for each individual color. It would have to be re-inked and run through on its own. So it was really intense and laborious process. And not only did it take a separate printing for each one, but they would have to actually line up and re-register the original image so that each color would fall in the exact place where it belonged. So it may look spontaneous, but it definitely wasn't spontaneous in the making.
Okay, thank you. And then the idea, you talked about the Prado pieces, and they're black and white. How was that process different than Police Chanel?
Well, these would have been run through just once, and the manipulation of the etching plate would have been done after it was drawn, would have been done by how the ink was applied and rubbed off. So where you would want portions of it to show as very dark, you would leave more ink. Where you wanted it to show lighter, you would rub away more ink, and so it was manipulated in that way. But now, only one color of ink would have been used.
Okay, and I know on the colorful Police Chanel that there were many stones used for making the lithograph. Do you have the information on the Prado piece? Was that done on a stone as well?
This was, I think the Prado piece is an etching.
So it was done on a plate?
Yes. Yes, okay. This was an etching, so it would have been done on a metal plate. Usually copper plate.
Yeah, that was a viewer question. They were wondering what the difference was. Thank you.
And now we will move forward to Renoir and invite Deb back.
Okay. Hello again. Now we're going to take a look at some pieces that are a bit more gentler in style. This is by Pierre-Auguste Renoir. He had a very long and varied career in painting, sculpting, and drawing. He didn't discover printmaking, though, until later in his career when he was in his 50s. Most of his prints are lithographs. A lithograph is a method of printmaking in which an image is drawn with a greasy crayon on a copper plate or a stone, and then the image is on the stone, and the surface is then watered down and inked. Next, a sheet of paper is placed on top of that image, and a very heavy press, sometimes up to 10,000 pounds, is used to transfer that image to the sheet of paper, and only the ink will adhere to the drawing. So now artists could create multiple works of art, and this would be a great source of income for them. As we all know, in Paris in the 1890s, it was the luxury capital of the world where people went to buy fashion and art. And now artists could give those people the art that they craved. Renoir is known for his pictures of people, and he often used his friends and his family for his subject matter. In his depictions, he wanted to capture that hidden treasure of every person that he met. Take a look at this image. This is his friend, Louis Veltot. Louis Veltot was not an unimportant man. He was an artist. He did not describe himself as an impressionist. He did not paint in that style. He called himself a fauve artist. He loved to paint with very bright, bold colors. But take a look at the way he's depicted here, rather unexceptional. Notice how he's sitting in very casually in that chair, wearing very casual clothes, looking completely relaxed. That was his personality. And that is exactly what Renoir wanted to capture. These two artists worked together on several works of art, including their portraits like this one. Okay, and the next two images we are going to see are very personal to Renoir. They're address the love of children, and that's common in most cultures. The pencil drawing on the left is called Coco. That is an image of Renoir's youngest son, Claude, but they called him Coco. And here he's only 1 or 2 years old. It's very, very sweet, very impressionistic. Not a lot of drawing, not a lot of sketching, but just enough to give us that lovely, lovely, lovely image of that little boy. And on the right, we're seeing a lithograph. This is his most complete lithograph. It's called a pin hat. And this image is of two girls, young girls, and they happen to be the daughter and the niece of Berthe Morisot, who we just saw earlier, who was depicted by Manet. You know, if you wanted to capture somebody's likeness, you could take a photograph, right? But Renoir knew that. He did not choose to take a photograph of these girls. No, he wanted to draw them in a lithograph and make a print of them and capture the intimacy and the warmth of these two young, lovely women. Christine, are there any questions?
Not at this time, Deb.
Okay, Jim, back to you.
It looks like we might have lost Jim's audio for the moment.
Sorry about that.
There we
I
go.
muted Cindy earlier. I had muted myself. I
Okay.
apologize, everyone. Today, I'm talking about Henri de Latreuse-Lautrec. And to understand Latreuse-Lautrec's artwork, you have to understand the man. He was born into an aristocratic family with a long and distinguished ancestry, but had recently fallen on hard times. His parents were first cousins, and Henry suffered from a number of congenital health conditions contributed to the tradition of inbreeding. At the age of 13, he fractured his left thigh bone, and at 14, his right thigh bone. The breaks did not heal properly, leading physicians to believe he may have suffered by what is referred to today as the Toulouse-Lautrec syndrome. Cindy, as a wordsmith, I bet you know the actual medical term for the Toulouse-Lautrec syndrome.
Oh, Jim, and you know I love to say it. The medical term is pycnodysostosis.
I'll refer to it as Toulouse-Lautrec syndrome. His legs ceased to grow, so that as an adult he was only 5 feet tall, having developed an adult-sized torso while retaining child-sized legs. Physically limited, he immersed himself in his art. Toulouse-Lautrec was drawn to Montmartre, a hilly area of Paris famous for its bohemian, edgier lifestyle and vibrant nightlife. When the Moulin Rouge Cabaret opened its doors, Toulouse-Lautrec was commissioned to produce a series of posters. Thereafter, the cabaret reserved a seat for him and displayed his paintings. He spent much time in brothels, where he was accepted by prostitutes and madames to such an extent he would move in and live in the brothels for weeks at a time. He shared their lives and became their confidant. An alcoholic for most of his adult life, he died to complications of alcoholism and syphilis at the age of 36. In 1899, 2 years before his death, he was hospitalized and placed in a sanitarium and was asked to draw to do a drawing to prove his mental fitness. And he produced At the Circus, the piece we're looking at now. He produced At the Circus using crayon, watercolor, and pastel. Here he is depicting a nightclub theater performance with a Japanese theme. We are not at the circus. We see the main dancer crossing a flooded stage on lily pads. You can see where the stage is surrounded by a frame and is flooded with water, and the lily pads are hard stage props. He's drawn the people almost in caricature. We, the viewer, are inclined or included in the picture or taking part in the performance. We are behind the dancers as part of the chorus, or maybe even as a background dancer. He is bringing us, the viewer, into the performance, and we are seeing it not as someone seated in the audience, but as a performer on the stage. Our next piece is called Miss Loie Fuller. This model is a color lithograph, is Loie Fuller. Her real name is Marie Louise Fuller. And I have to tell you, very little about Miss Loie Fuller is ordinary. An American dancer born in Chicago, she made her stage debut at age 4. After 25 years in the United States, performing in vaudeville acts, burlesque shows, and even a stint with Buffalo Bill, Fuller made a name for herself with her serpentine dance, which she performed using long lengths of silk extended by long poles and multicolored lighting. Her serpentine dance became so famous and was so unusual, Cindy has arranged for a video clip of it. Cindy? Cindy, can you go back to the lithograph of Miss Loie Fuller for me? Wasn't that dance spectacular? I mean, it was just wonderful. By 1892, word of Fuller's innovative style carried her to Paris, where she danced at the Folies Bergère. This lithograph was done the following year in 1893. A publisher wanted Lautrec to commemorate her dance. Lautrec made a limited edition of 60 lithograph prints to commemorate her performance and create a view, this time from the audience's perspective. What's so unusual about the addition of 60 prints is that each print was printed using different colors or inks and sprinkled with metallic powder to simulate the visual effects of Fuller's appearance and to emphasize the luminosity of her dress, the beautiful dance itself, and the stage lighting, for which she held several patents. Each print was unique and different from the others. Loie Fuller became so famous that by 1900, she was the only woman performer to have her own pavilion at the 1900 Paris Exposition, or World's Fair. Let's move on to our next piece. Again, thank you, Cindy, for that beautiful video. Here we have one of Lautrec's most iconic and famous pieces. I'm going to back up a little bit because in the 1870s, in the development of presses capable of handling extra large sheets of paper, the art form of the poster became possible. Toulouse-Lautrec became the first great master of poster art, receiving numerous commissions from the proprietors of the concert halls, cabarets, and other after-hours establishments he befriended, such as the Moulin Rouge. This is a quintessential lithograph, and its title is Divan Japonais, or Japanese couch. The Divan Japonais was a popular Paris nightclub. The poster was made as an advertisement and appeared on hundreds of walls and windows throughout Paris. Deb, what's going on in this picture? We're having real problems with muting today. Deb, you're going to have to unmute yourself.
I'm so sorry.
That's okay. We've all done it.
Well, the very first thing I noticed about this poster is the shock of black you see on her dress, on her hat, on the gentleman's hat next to her. And take a look at her bright red hair. Boy, she is very, very special looking, isn't she? But what's really interesting to me and what I wonder about is who is that woman that they're looking at with the black long gloves? And why is her head cut off?
Thanks, Deb. Let's notice how Lautrec layers the letters. We're going to start off first up at the top with the name of the establishment, Divan Japonais. The poster, this is again a lithograph, and as Deb had explained, for each color, it would have to be run through. So the red, green, yellow, black had to be applied individually. Large planes of black draw attention to the woman, along with her bright red hair. She is Jane Avril, a well-known French can-can dancer, enjoying the show like any other audience member. This composition also reveals Toulouse-Lautrec's admiration for Degas in his artwork. If you notice, we're looking down from the top, and it's almost like from an oblique view. It's almost a little bit of on an unusual angle. He's exaggerated the foreshortening, and figures are cut off by the frame. Most severely truncated is the bass viola instruments. The instruments in this work become almost abstract shapes, pointing at Yvette Guilbert, along with the maestro's baton. Okay, she is the main entertainer on stage, visible in the upper left. Lautrec even crops out her face, as you noticed, or you had mentioned, Deb, but that was perfectly okay at the time because everyone would have automatically recognized her as Yvette Guilbert, the famous French cabaret singer who always wore long black gloves. Lautrec was a great admirer of Yvette Guilbert, drawing her numerous times. The DIA, for example, has 13 artworks by Lautrec featuring her. Jane Avril was also one of his favorite models. The individual next to Jane Avril is Edward Dujonais. He was a dandy, an author, and nightclub regular. What I love most about this particular lithograph is the way Lautrec leaves room for the viewer to almost enter the scene, as if invited to sit in an empty chair next to Jane Avril and have chances to enjoy the cabaret entertainment and rub shoulders with the celebrities there at the time. Our next piece, it's actually two pieces. The first on the left is Judic and Daho. In this print, Toulouse-Lautrec depicts a common, unremarkable scene of a woman being fitted into a corset by her dresser. The man on the left, named Judic, and Daho, the woman, were stage performers. The face of the woman is lit from below, suggesting the effects of gaslights used at night in Paris. Toulouse-Lautrec shows them in her dressing room, getting ready for their stage performance. These people are not being idealized at the time. They're just, in fact, you begin to see somewhat of the tiredness in their faces, a little bit of the excess of their lives. He's showing them as they are. He's not being critical, though on the other hand, he's not trying to honor them. He's just showing them for who they are. On the right, we have a lithograph at the Moulin Rouge, the Franco-Prussian Union. Here he depicts a woman, one French and one German, out on the town, highlighting the liveliness of Paris Montmartre's theater district. The title is a play on words, referring to the Franco-Prussian War 20 years earlier. The image and joke suggests the theater district was a place where everyone, regardless of their country's political positions, could get along and enjoy a wonderful evening. Christine, are there any questions? And I have to warn you, you're muted.
Thank you for reminding me, Jim. Yeah, there was a question in regard to all of the pieces that are being presented in general. A viewer wanted to know, how often are these paperworks out on view and in the galleries for the visitors to see?
Paperworks, or any piece of art done on paper as compared to canvas, are extremely fragile. So the pastels, watercolors, all of our prints can only come out for approximately 3 to maybe up to 6 months at a time. That's about the most they can be exposed to the light, and it's the most that they're afraid, that the curators are afraid that they can be put out and open, they might be damaged. After their short viewing of only 3 to 6 months, they're put back into conservation. They refer to them as putting them to sleep, and they'll go back into conservation for typically for a minimum of 2 years. So it's very unusual at the museum to see pastel works or prints and that. It's normally the only time they're brought out is for exhibitions.
Thank you, Jim.
At this point, I think I'm going to turn it back over to Cindy. It's a couple minutes to 2 and for some closing comments. Cindy?
Okay, we probably are only going to get to one of Viard's images. You've been looking at his photographic portrait here for a little bit while we've been taking questions. So we're just going to talk about the 2 prints in front of us, a gallery at Gymnase. And the idea here is to put it into perspective. Viard was just a young boy when the first group of Impressionists came into being. So he's coming sort of at the end of Impressionism in an era known as Post-Impressionism. So his own visual experience was influenced by the patterns and colors of his own mother's dressmaking materials. He was also influenced by the influx to France of Japanese woodcut block prints. And his curiosity was also perked by the work of poets by the name of Mallarmé and Verlaine, who were popular in France at the time. Compare these two, the prints, compare these 2 prints and consider the role that color is playing in calling out the details and creating the mood. In the black and white image on the left, most of the details are kind of fuzzy and it's hard to make out it's very abstract. It's hard to make out what's actually happening here. But once he applies the color to the print on the right, the yellow, the green, and the purple help define the audience, which is here, and the stage, which is here. So if you look back at the black and white, it's almost impossible to discern, what we're looking at, if there are people, where it's at. But once he applies the color, and the use of color is what helps bring about the total image. So the addition of color makes it easier to read. Now it looks like we're coming to the close of our hour. And with that, I'll ask Christine if we have any quick questions before we move on.
We just have one of the audience members said, thank you to everyone. Great job. Love your personalities. It's all showing through your presentation of the works. And the hour has been thoroughly enjoyed. Thank you.
Well, all I have to say about that is they should see what our personalities are like during our rehearsals. So, as we've seen, the Impressionists created optical encounters. The success of their art directly depended upon the viewer's response. They never let you forget that you were looking at a painting or a print. No longer had all the traces of the artist's hand been smoothed away. Thank you for joining us today. I want to remind you that the DIA reopened on July 10th. We invite you to plan your visit by reserving a timed entry ticket via the DIA website. The hours are currently Wednesday through Friday, 9 to 4, and Saturday and Sunday from 10 to 5. Our current exhibitions include Guests of Honor, Frida Kahlo, Salvador Dali, Bruegel's The Wedding Dance Revealed, Guests of Honor from the Louvre, Udon's Portraits of Washington and Franklin, and From Bruegel to Rembrandt, which is a print exhibition. And in our photographic gallery, we have Michigan's Great Lakes. Our next new exhibition will be Detroit Style, Car Design in the Motor City, 1950 through 2020. It will start November 15th, and it will continue through June of 2021. Please join us again next Thursday at 1 o'clock when our presentation will feature clothing and adornment in art, and the title of it is Vogue. Thank you.